Terrence McNally. Welcome to Free Forum, a world that just might work. I'm going to be speaking today with James Steele, one half of the longest-running investigative reporting team in American history. He and Don Barlett worked together for over 5 decades, won journalism's highest awards, wrote 9 books together, including the #1 best-selling America, What Went Wrong. They were among the earliest to diagnose America's crisis of inequality. Don Barlett died this past October at the age of 88, and to learn more about their work over the years, you can go to barlettandsteele.com. And I'm going to spell it out for you because you might not predict this would be it. It's Barlett, not Bartlett, B-A-R-L-E-T-T, and, that's A-N-D, Steele, S-T-E-E-L-E, barlettandsteele, all one word.com. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, environment, economics, health, culture, science, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, TerrenceMcNally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net. I'm going to start by quoting the intro that I wrote when I spoke to the two of them in 2012 about their book, Betrayal of the American Dream. So this is what I said then. Let's suppose for a moment there was a country where the people in charge charted a course that eliminated millions of good-paying jobs. Suppose they gave away several million more jobs to other nations. Finally, imagine that the people running this country implemented economic policies that enabled those at the very top to grow ever richer while most others grew poorer. You wouldn't want to live in such a place, would you? Well, too bad, you already do. Now remember, I'm reading the words of today's guests, Don Barlett and Jim Steele. These are some of the consequences of failed U.S. government policies that have been building over the last 3 decades. The same policies that people in Washington today are intent on keeping or expanding. Most significant of all, the American dream of the last half-century has been revoked for millions of people. A dream rooted in a secure job, a home in the suburbs, the option for families to live on 1 income rather than 2, a better life than your parents had, and a still better life for your children. U.S. government policies consistently have failed to protect that dream in the face of growing international competition. Instead, they've favored the very forces that shift jobs, money, and influence abroad. As a result, the United States is about to enter the 21st century much the same way it left the 19th, with a 2-class society. Okay, now I'm leaving that, but I'm still in my intro. Notice that last line, about to enter the 21st century. Barlett and Steele wrote these words in 1992. They are the first words of their Pulitzer Prize-winning series of articles in the Philadelphia Inquirer, which led to the book, America, What Went Wrong. Fast forward, the crash, followed by the inability and the unwillingness of government to respond effectively, opened a lot of people's eyes. The point of view of the 99% movement, Occupy, took place in 2012. The point of view of the 99% movement is basically the one Barlett and Steele described and predicted in 1992, at the birth of the Clinton era. So that was my intro in 2012. Already 20 years after they'd written those lines, 4 years after the crash, 4 years before Trump's first election, and a dozen years before today. Not like we weren't warned. Franklin Roosevelt saved capitalism from itself with the New Deal. Barlett and Steele were providing data in 92 and stories pointing out where and why it needed to be saved from itself again. Our 2-party, winner-take-all, money-dominated, minority rule-prone political process is broken. As a society, we have not figured out how to work together outside of wartime and natural disasters, and nowadays even those two can look pretty shaky. Trump runs as a populist, plays a populist on TV, And his second administration is poised to supply our country a final explosive shot of neoliberalism, which AOC and Ro Khanna, Sanders and Warren, even Biden and Harris were finally moving away from. Trump hates regulation, and unregulated markets are the fever dream of neoliberals. Barlett and Steele weren't writing what they did because they were against people being rewarded for their achievements. There's plenty of room for success in a society that accounts for the common good. But society is large, unruly, emotional, diverse, and it has to be taken into account for the whole thing to work. That shouldn't be considered left or right. As a guiding principle for the powerful and the wealthy, it's the sensible and practical long-term play. And maybe that's the problem, because maybe they treat their approach to society the same way they do most other of their investments. They're looking for an exit strategy. And don't even get me talking about the space craze of the billionaires. Together, Barlett and Steele won the highest prizes in journalism, but my admiration for them and their work goes far beyond all the awards. For half a century together, they performed an enormous public service by choosing their targets, asking questions, investigating, connecting dots to reveal information people deserve to know about the society they live in, the companies they rely on and work for, and the government they elect. Because I want you to get a good feel for their work, I'm going to go into a bit more detail than I usually do in a bio. In 1972, Jim and Don, working with Philip Meyer, a pioneer in the field of computer-assisted journalism, used a computer to analyze more than 1,000 cases of violent crime in Philadelphia, and their series Crime and Injustice was the largest computer-assisted journalism project of its time. For their series Auditing the IRS, which documented unequal patterns of tax collection, they were awarded the Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting in 1975. Again, 1975, 50 years ago. They also received the Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting in 1989 for their series The Great Tax Giveaway, which disclosed the identities of individuals and corporations that received preferential tax breaks in the Bipartisan Tax Reform Act of 1986. Their 1991 Inquirer series, America, What Went Wrong, on Wall Street and Washington's promotion of growing inequality, was named one of the 100 greatest works of journalism of the 20th century by the New York University School of Journalism. Bill Moyers produced 2 one-hour specials based on the series for PBS, and the book was, as I said, a New York Times #1 bestseller. It was those Moyers programs which first turned me on to Don and Jim. In 1997, Barlett and Steele left the Inquirer to become editors-at-large at Time, where they won 2 National Magazine Awards for, again, note the titles of what they were working on. They won one of their National Magazine Awards for What Corporate Welfare Cost You in 1998, and another for Big Money in Politics, Who Gets Hurt in the year 2000. To encourage their kind of in-depth reporting, the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation created the Barlett and Steele Awards, and they're administered annually by Arizona State University to young journalists. And Jim Steele is a lecturer at the Klein College of Media and Communication at Temple University, which in 2016 established the James B. Steele Chair in Journalism Innovation, and he's a director of the Fund for Investigative Journalism. Other books by Barlett and Steele include America, Who Really Pays the Taxes, Critical Condition, How Healthcare in America Became Big Business and Bad Medicine, The Betrayal of the American Dream, the book Jim and Don and I talked about in 2012, and America, What Went Wrong, The Crisis Deepens, an updated and expanded edition of their 1992 bestseller, which came out in 2021. Finally, welcome back, Jim Steele, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
Well, great to be with you again, Terrence, and I can't say enough for your summary of the way we've approached a lot of these issues. It might give us a bad name to put everything in so few words. It may not be a reason for us to write books anymore if we can summarize it that succinctly and that accurately. But I can't say enough for your summary. It really captures exactly what Don and I wrote about and believed over the years. And an issue that sadly is still very much with us.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's why I do that emphasis of 20 years ago. But it is 1992 is now 32 years ago. and you guys predicted it. And I mean, at some point in the conversation, I am going to ask you just how it feels to be Cassandra, because it must be, I mean, on the one hand, on one shoulder you go, well, good for us, we were onto it. On the other shoulder, it's like, but...
Well, I've got a story to tell you about Cassandra if you want to hear it.
Sure.
After one of these series of ours appeared in the Philadelphia Inquirer, we were attacked by an academic who believed everything is fine in the United States and what are these guys worried about? And he called us modern-day Cassandras. Well, at the time, my 14-year-old daughter at the breakfast table read this letter, and she looked up and she said, well, Dad, wasn't Cassandra right? So anyway, one doesn't like to be a Cassandra, but we have to remember she was on target.
That's right. That reminds me also, when people often say, David and Goliath, very often they forgot that David won.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Let me tell listeners, by the way, we're recording this conversation Tuesday, January 7th. So I'm going to set you up to really kind of let yourself go here. I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas we talk about. So I've named the books and the prize-winning work, but I'd love for you to tell us in your own words how you see your path, your journey. And take as long as you want with this. I assume that life has of late thrown you into reflection. And I certainly intend for us to talk about what America is facing, not just in the second Trump administration, but what we're facing as a society that made his reelection possible. Similar threats and trends in other countries, Germany, the UK, wherever Elon Musk is spouting off his advice to them. It means there's a right-wing threat somewhere. But I'd be honored to spend some time just talking about your particular personal experience, choosing your partner, finding a partner, choosing your career, being part of a team, apparently able to do the work you wanted to do, focused on the issues that mattered to you, and innovating as you went about all of that. I mean, it's a pretty unique path the two of you trod. So fill us in on things like, how did you team up? Was it at first just for one story or one beat? And then how does it evolve into a 50-year partnership? Those kind of things. I also expect before the hour's up, we'll talk about how it felt, as I said, the Cassandra note, how it felt to be read, awarded, respected, and ignored.
Okay.
I mean, you even talk in the Crisis Deepens about how Bill Clinton still claims how much this, America, what went wrong meant to him. But if you look at his record, it doesn't look like he ever picked it up. So here you go. Your story, and I'll break in with questions.
Well, I'll try to keep this within several hours.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just briefly, I began journalism when I was in high school in Kansas City. And I fell in love with it then. Gathering facts, writing about issues, public issues on a small scale. And then I got a job on my hometown newspaper, the Kansas City Times, in my first year in college in the city, as a cub reporter, doing simple things, obituaries, little accidents, fires, all those rinky-dink things that you do as a young journalist. Gradually building up, covering politics, labor unions, strikes, all kinds of things. Sometimes getting to do long-range things, but by long-range, I'm talking about just a couple of weeks, nothing really significant. And that's where kind of the bug bit me to try to look behind the headlines. Because on so many stories I wrote back then in Kansas City, as good as the training was, I could see that there was more to the story. So I wanted to dig deeper. But it really wasn't until I got to the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1970 that I really got the opportunity to do that. Started covering urban affairs in a city that had many, many big urban issues, and still does to this day, by sheer accident. And this is what happens a lot in journalism. Don Barlett had arrived at the paper the same time I had. He was several years older than me, and he'd been at 3 or 4 other newspapers around the country before he arrived at the Inquirer. And we began talking to each other about this, that, and the other thing. And I told him one day about one thing I was wrestling with, which was a curious housing problem in the city, about how houses seemed to be being repossessed by the government. It wasn't clear what it was about. And the two of us began looking at property records just as a lark one afternoon. And we saw enough stuff that indicated that something was going on with the federal government repossessing housing that was supposed to help poor people. So to make a long story short, we proposed to the new editor of the paper. The paper's whole ownership had changed hands that year. We said, this looks like a significant story. Will you cut us loose to look at this? And he was delighted. He said, this looks good to him. You have my blessing. Away you go. To make a long story short, we worked on this off and on for a year. The result of this, about 50 people were indicted. It cast into doubt all of federal policy at the time, which was supposedly to help poor people get a home. But instead, it had provided an avenue, a superhighway for speculators and others to make a lot of money, and mortgage companies to make a lot of money on this. That had nothing to do with helping poor people. Don and I, at the end of this, the series won several national awards, and we looked at each other afterward and said, well, that worked, didn't it? So we then proposed another story, and we've made this point all along. Nobody came along and said, you are our team, my sons, go forth into the world, or anything like that. We just stumbled into this like what always happens in journalism. And we began proposing stories from then on out. First at the Inquirer, then at Time magazine, and then after that for about 10 years at Vanity Fair. So it happened by accident. But one thing I want to stress, a lot of reporting teams, you have a situation that one person may be the writer, the other person is the reporter. I think the reason that we worked together so well for so long is that both of us did both things. Both of us reported, which we loved. Both of us did the writing, which we didn't particularly like to do. I mean, all sound-minded people do not like to write. I mean, writing is just so hard. Where reporting and research is just so much pure fun and pure enjoyment. So we divided things right down the middle in every particular way from the very beginning. And I think that was the basis of the partnership throughout. We originally began at local stories in Philadelphia, but then when there was a change of ownership and the great Gene Roberts arrived from the New York Times in Philadelphia, he suggested taking on national and international subjects, which is what we then moved into much broader areas, from oil to radioactive waste to income inequality to how the taxes are collected to America, what went wrong, which you mentioned earlier. So that in kind of a nutshell is how all of this developed.
So when you say you split it down the middle, I have collaborated on screenplays and I have collaborated on a book. So I'm always, interested in how people do it. When you say you split it down the middle, was you go interview these guys, I'll track down that lead? How do you split research and writing down the middle?
The way this would happen, we would each, when we were tackling a new subject, we would start reading about it and seeing what areas interested us. We would then talk it over with each other. And one of us might come across the name of an individual or a company that looked fascinating, and then that person would proceed to research and report on that. The other would see something else and would kind of follow that strain. Then what would happen? When we would do a series at the Inquirer and Time magazine, one of us would write one part, the other would write another part. We would then kick the story over to the other once we'd written it out, and the other might make some significant additions to it or say, I don't think this really works, blah, blah, blah. In other words, we edited each other very, very vigorously before we ever turned it into any editor. Then we would divide up the lead story because there would be parts of it one of us would write and the other would write and so forth. But that's the way we divided it up. So we would do this work individually, but then turn it over to the other for editing. Because, every individual sees different things or has come across different kinds of information. And we both didn't have the kinds of egos that got in the way of each other's work. So if I wrote something that Don said, well, I don't think this quite works. How about this? I'd say, excellent. And vice versa.
Right. In a good partnership, that is a gift.
That's what has to happen for a partnership to work. And that's why it lasted so long, because that was at the root of it. It was not our egos. It was this goal to do the very best possible work and to try to explain this complicated issue as clearly and as powerfully as we could while adhering to the facts.
Yeah, well, that second part is the writing part. I was going to say, in my collaborations, the thing I always hope for is to say, the work is boss.
Yes, that's a great term. I wish I'd had that one to remind myself from time to time. But we both love to report. We both love the gathering of information, and the partnership evolved over time as journalism itself evolved. There became a time, as time went on, where we became much more explanatory and much more interpretive in some of the things we did.
And you're saying you did that, I'm guessing, for two reasons. One, you felt the inclination that needed to be done, but two, because that began to, that big wall between opinion and news began to blur.
It began to blur, but we always took the position, as long as you had the facts following whatever that interpretation was, it was okay. In other words, if you made some broad statement and you didn't support it by what followed, that doesn't work. We always made sure that anytime we said something like that, it was then followed by some substantive evidence that would make people realize, okay, I'll buy that statement. I see that they're on the right track that way. And that's the problem I do have with some journalism today. You will see these broad statements, but they're not backed up.
Right, right. No, it's interesting. When I read what now, I will confess this. When I go through a newspaper or any publication these days, I find I'm often more interested in the opinion than the straight news, because the straight news will change tomorrow. The opinion, if it's done well, will have gathered facts from more than one place and kind of put them together. So in a sense, I can get a little deeper into it.
I agree. I think that's a very good observation on your part. And it's, and a lot of people, a lot of the changes in journalism haven't been very effective in achieving what you just described.
Right.
And that's what I think has sometimes angered readers or viewers or listeners. So we had one series back in our series on special tax breaks back in the 1980s, 1988, where we took the Tax Reform Act and we went through it and found these paragraphs that awarded, in some cases, individuals or a small group of individuals, giving them huge tax breaks. At the same time, the bill was saying, we're going to make the tax code fairer for everybody. Well, we deciphered those. Somebody called us Egyptologists later because we found out, who was behind these things. The lead on that series started out, say, if you're a middle-aged, balding man living in a northeast Philadelphia row house and you need a new roof on your house, and you go to your congressman and get him to put a line in a bit of tax legislation that such and such resident and such address can now get a new roof on his house. What do you think the odds of you getting that? Lots of luck. I mean, that was the lead. But then we came back and said, but some people do get that.
Right.
And then we had a specific right after it of somebody who was described very specifically that just described them, that gave them a multi-million-dollar tax break. So I think it's okay to do those kinds of generalities as long as you back it up.
Right, right. So let's talk a little bit about that way that you're backing it up. In other words, your work combines data, analysis, and stories. That personal story about a person who was either benefited or aggrieved and that sort of thing. How did you approach the weaving of those three, and did that change over the years? And was there one of you that was stronger with one than the other or anything like that?
I think we both did pretty much everything. Don liked numbers a little bit more than I did, but it was just a facility that he was really good with. But I also did them as well when it zeroed into some particular thing I did. I may have done slightly more interviews than he did. But again, these things were not significant differences. I think that's the thing I want to emphasize. And it would vary from story to story. The way we worked on everything, we would look at a subject, read everything we could think of to start with. Never call anybody for an interview in the beginning. And this is the thing I've told young reporters. The last thing I want to see you do when you get on the story is pick up a phone and call somebody. You need to read about your subject. You need to school yourself in what it's about. And then you know the questions to ask somebody. And more important than anything, when you ask that person, you know whether or not they're lying to you, or whether they simply just don't know what they're talking about. Half the time, people aren't lying; they just don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
But you as a journalist need to know what it is, whether this person is to be believable or not. So we believe very strongly in that kind of those early steps. And then depending on the story, what the subject was, we would then begin to zero in on, maybe there were companies, maybe it was a government program, but then always paramount in our minds was the question of who is benefiting and who is getting hurt by this particular issue. And that was true of everything from day one. In our first housing story, who was getting hurt? The poor people who thought they were buying houses for the first time in their life, only to see them fall apart 6 months later because a speculator had just put a coat of paint on a dilapidated place that was bound to collapse on them. The same thing was with the tax break series. Who was benefiting from that? Who were the fat cats who got these tax breaks while everybody else didn't or lost the tax benefit? And with America, what went wrong? It was the story of people who worked in these plants or businesses who'd suddenly been run out of a job by private equity folks, leveraged buyouts, the money guys, through no fault of their own, hardworking people who'd done all the right things, even tried to keep up with technology in various ways, but had lost their jobs through no fault of their own. So that was always the primary thing. How do you find these people? And that was always a totally different way. Sometimes it necessitated going to the towns where a plant had closed or a business had been bought and then sold and then stripped of all its assets. Sometimes there were government forums where you could find people who had lost their jobs because of exports. The Labor Department, there's a particular form that you file if you've lost your job because of an export. We got literally hundreds of names over the years, of specific names of people, operations all over the country. So depending on the subject, there were any number of ways that we would then obtain the names of people. And we always felt from day one, those profiles of those people were absolutely pivotal. And we always tried to find people who had really done the right things. I mean, who had not squandered their savings or anything like that, who had just done all the right things and then suddenly just been tossed out by the system. So all of those things, flowed into each one of these particular stories. And I think, and then on top of that, the other thing that drove us was the hypocrisy that you see in politicians about what this piece of legislation is going to do, what that one's going to do. So we also made it a practice of showing how a lot of these claims were doomed from the beginning, or for various reasons fell flat on their face, and why that was important because of the individuals who'd suffered as a result of that out in the society. So all of those things kind of went into each one of our projects. We never set out, and I really want to emphasize this, a lot of people think, a lot of investigative reporters, they sit down one day and they say, okay, we're going to go after this and just blow the lid off this thing. We almost always started with questions, like why are these plants being bought and sold and run out of business? Is this really better for the economy? As some economists were saying, say it's just part of the way the American system works, it's constantly renewing itself, blah, blah, blah. Are imports really good for the country as a whole because they're cheaper products? Well, it's more complicated than that. Anyway, we always started with questions, not with answers. And I think that's the other thing that drove the way we went about our work.
Yeah, no, I often say that what I'm hoping to do is to ask good questions and then question answers.
That's good. Yeah. Well, you ask good questions, I must say.
But it's that point of, I mean, and that's what you guys were doing. The government had, or the politician had already supplied an answer. This is why we're doing this. But then you question the answer.
Right, exactly.
Does it stack up? Does it play out? Is it just sales?
Right. And we also tried to do this. I won't belabor this point, though. We I think, were in the forefront of using data in journalism. I mean, it started with our criminal justice series, but almost every series from then on out, we used data on not to hit people over the head with a bunch of numbers, but to show these broad patterns in the society and what's happening. And when we talked 12 years ago in the Betrayal book, the heart of a lot of that book was showing what was happening to the middle class, what was happening to the rich in this country. We did all those numbers ourselves. I mean, we weren't dependent on a foundation over here or there to whatever their numbers were in a particular thing. We crunched our own numbers, starting with various spreadsheet programs. Actually, even before the spreadsheet programs, we used to do this stuff by hand, if you can believe that or not.
Well, my God, if you did, I mean, just the fact that you were doing computer-assisted journalism in 1972, people may not remember what a computer looked like in a room full of punch cards
right.
in 1972.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I can see some young people out there scratching their head. Punch cards, what are those? Yeah, anyway.
Right. Right. Let me tell people this is Freeform, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally, speaking today with James Steele, half of the investigative reporting team of Barlett and Steele. He and Don Barlett worked together for over 5 decades, won journalism's highest awards, wrote 9 books, and perhaps most significantly were among the earliest to diagnose America's crisis of inequality. Don Barlett passed away in October at the age of 88, and you can learn more about all of their work and their books and everything at barlettandsteele.com, and I'm going to spell it for you because it may not be the way you think. Barlett, B-A-R-L-E-T-T, and A-N-D, Steele, S-T-E-E-L-E, barlettandsteele.com. Talk a little bit, because you've been talking about it, how it worked for you. In fact, you were, that chair I noted was about innovation in journalism. Your work with computers in 72, your mix of data and stories and all of this. Talk about how you adapted to changes in journalism and what you see when you look out today. It seems to me, and I'm not the only one for sure, that there's 2 things that I think threaten good journalism today. One is the fact that that newspapers more and more have to be owned by billionaires. That's one. Who may have other agendas about their other businesses. Let me just quickly make a note for folks. When Disney capitulates and settles with Trump on a defamation thing, $15 million, I mean, they make that at one restaurant in Disneyland in a week, I mean, it's like, it's journalism. Their ABC News is just a small piece of what they're doing. Same is true for Bezos. Same is true for the owner of the LA Times, etc. So that's one thing. Another thing is that people don't even read the journalism that's out there. They get their news off TikTok and so on. It just seems to me this field that you've dedicated your life to and made such significant contributions to, it has morphed into something where a young Jim Steele would have a hard time looking ahead and seeing the possibility of what you, James Steele, have accomplished.
Well, there are places that you can do this today, but there are fewer. I think there's no doubt about that. The interesting thing about your question is, I still do a certain amount of teaching and mentoring. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the program, I'm a director of the Fund for Investigative Journalism. And we provide grants to freelance journalists really all over the country who bring proposals to us about stuff they would like to pursue. And I can tell you from the classes that I've taught around the country, and I'm still doing this almost every year, one place or another. There's tremendous enthusiasm among young people, young potential journalists. So that part is still good. What's difficult are the business models, because there aren't the larger regional papers anymore. They almost all across the country, they have shrunken in size. And some do not even publish 5 days a week in terms of paper. They publish online, but they're not on paper. So that's obviously a difference, and nobody knows exactly how all of that's going to work out. What we see right now, though, and this is what gives me some hope, in almost every metropolitan area, there are multiple nonprofit, web-based news outlets. Some of them are just covering, let's just say, City Hall or city government. Others are covering specific sections of a city. Others may have a broader mission. We all know on the national level, ProPublica, when ProPublica was founded, I can't remember when this was, maybe 15 years ago, everybody gave it 3 years. Well, it's not only survived, but it's won Pulitzers. It's set a very high standard of outstanding investigative reporting, has a real deep war chest because of grants it's received. So while it's a different business model than the old days, it's proven to be quite successful. It's still a mixed bag, though, because there aren't as many of those outlets as in the past. But we're still evolving. And what gives me hope, though, and what I find really reassuring, is I see in a lot of the young people all that fire in the bellies that I would see in a lot of folks my age years and years ago. So that desire to do that is still there. The other thing that I've never studied this, so I can't speak with any authority on this, but if you really go back into the 19th century in the U.S., 1880s, 90s, 1900, around there, the news business was very, very fragmented at the time. Now, they were all newspapers and magazines to a lesser extent. But, I mean, every city had multiple outlets, covering any number of things. Everybody had their favorite paper, so on and so forth. And a lot of those were very partisan, biased, and so forth. We didn't really have the papers trying to give us a complete picture the way in the 20th century a lot of the big papers did. So we're evolving into that kind of a thing. The difference is the business model, again, is dependent on grants and contributions and so forth. We don't know how all of that's going to work out down the road. So we're still evolving. I just feel as time goes on, a lot of this will survive because there's such a deep desire on the part of the public to have the answers to a lot of these big questions. What I see has been hit so hard on a lot of the regional papers, city papers, is the basic coverage of city government, school boards, all of those kinds of things, which I started my career covering back in Kansas City. All of those things have been stripped away in almost every major area. So hopefully a lot of the nonprofits can pick up some of that slack. But I think the day where you had one dominant voice, let's say in a metro area, it's just gone. And that's why a lot of the papers have had so much trouble. But if we can find some happy medium between that and at least others covering various aspects of their community, then all will not be lost.
Yeah, I mean, it looks to me, and again, I'm not expert on this at all and don't have data to go to, but it looks to me like a big city will have journalism that survives. It seems to me it's the middle size city and the rural cities and rural towns and so on where it disappears, and everything starts from the bottom up.
You're absolutely right. And that, you put your finger on it. And all the studies about the so-called news deserts focus exactly on what you're talking about. It's the medium-sized cities and the rural areas across the country where which are actually going through, in many cases, a certain amount of depopulation in any event. But I mean, the great William Allen White, the editor of the Emporia Gazette, 19-teens, 1920s, a national figure because of the kind of reporting his small but influential paper did. You just don't see those there just aren't many of those kinds of editors anymore. There's just not the opportunity for them. And I don't know what's going to be the answer there. I don't know that those cities are going to be able to develop a kind of web-based entity that will fulfill some of that goal or need. I hope so, but the jury's still out on that. Interestingly enough, I'm working with the University of Missouri, which is the oldest journalism school in the country, by the way.
Wow.
They were the first ones to create such a degree back in 1909.
And this is where you grew up, isn't it?
I grew up in Missouri. I did.
Yeah.
And I went to another branch of the University of Missouri, but the mothership in Columbia, where the journalism school is, I'm working with them trying to develop a hub for investigative and enterprise journalism that can assist a lot of the smaller papers that have been hammered by these economic realities that have hit journalism. So people are trying things. They're working on things. They're trying to figure out the answer to this. And it may be a combination of both people buying the site or some advertising on it, grants from foundations. There are a lot of foundations out there that are very, very worried about what is happening to journalism. And that also is a good plus for getting some support to get us over these difficult times. So, I don't know what the answer is at the rural and the local level, but it's at the smaller regional level. But that really is, as you pointed out, a real gap in the system.
And let me say a couple of more things about it. One is that rural areas, and you say, but they're losing population. But it turns out losing population doesn't lose them voting power, right?
Right.
Right. Whether it's a state legislature, as most are, dominated by rural areas, or the Electoral College, the Senate, and so on. And so, and then a book you may or may not be familiar with, but one which I think you would like, is Michelle Wilde Anderson wrote a book called The Fight for the Town. And what it's about is 4 areas that were basically discarded through the process that you and Don wrote about for the last 50 years. And she picked 4 towns that suffered and are finding their way back. But one of the things that she pointed out that I hadn't quite I hadn't quite seen it, was as industry leaves, as manufacturing leaves and is replaced by service and all these sorts of things, what happens is the city, the town, the county now has less income. It's taxes, it's just collecting less. So it delivers less. And as it delivers less, people become more cynical about government. And the spiral in our smaller towns and rural areas that creates is played out, I think, in a Trump election.
I think you're right. And I visited so many of those towns over the years, which had lost a manufacturing plant of one sort or another, and have tried to figure out other ways to plug that hole, which is frankly impossible once they lose that, because suddenly good-paying jobs are no longer there, and it's very hard then to attract anything like that again.
That's right. Let me just say, I think many of them end up depending either on hospitals or prisons, which which is given the way both of those industries are being taken over or more and more dominated by private equity and ruthless capitalism, makes those a very tough source for livelihood.
Exactly, and in the case of many of them, there's very few jobs involved, except for healthcare. Of course, there's a certain number of jobs there, though most of the, one of the books Don and I wrote on healthcare, we were struck by, America has never faced the fact, most of the country has not faced the fact that healthcare is not like any other business. The idea that you can introduce business practices to healthcare to make it more efficient is one of the great myths governing the whole healthcare system. And the reason it's a myth is because think about why we have healthcare, and let's say why we have automobiles. We buy an automobile because we need this automobile, or because we like the looks of it, or we need it for our jobs, to take the kids to school, whatever it is, to get around, right? We have to have that car, and we want that car. Healthcare isn't something, we don't want to go spend money with a doctor or a hospital. We do it because we have to, because something has happened to us. So it's not so the whole idea of healthcare should actually be spending as little as possible on it. It's the opposite of buying a car. So until we realize that healthcare is different and it's not an option like buying something else, we're going to have this problem. I can't tell you the number of places I talked to when we did the book on healthcare, which had once been nonprofit entities, which were taken over by one of these hospital corporations, and they cut the staff significantly by 20 or 25%, so the money could then go to stockholders. Did this make the hospital more efficient? No, it didn't. It meant there were fewer people to take care of patients and to administer the whole operation. That's not what efficiency should be about when it comes to healthcare. And I think until we realize that, we're going to have more and more problems in healthcare. It's just not like any other industry. I'm not saying that you can't have efficiency in healthcare. That's not the point.
Right.
But the whole root
model, the whole model of what
different,
of how the consumer relates to the what they don't choose. As you point out, it's not a choice to consume healthcare.
Exactly. We want to sell more cars because that makes the economy go better, but we don't want to sell more healthcare unless people really need it in some case.
Right.
Anyway.
And I mean, I don't know if you followed the story of the Stewart hospitals in Massachusetts.
I have followed that. In fact, one of the proposals that came across our desk at the Fund for Investigative Journalism had to do with that whole fiasco up there.
Yeah. In other words, it is the poster child right now until a new one comes along for what goes wrong when private equity and that sort of bottom line approach is taken to healthcare, in which they sold off all the real estate, which is what they do when they buy a restaurant chain. And then but it's not the same with a hospital. So you sell off all the real estate, and now you owned that real estate. Now you no longer do. That hospital, you are now renting that hospital from some entity you sold it to. This just doesn't work in healthcare.
And that's exactly what private equity does. I mean, they did the same thing in the newspaper business.
That's right.
I'll never forget talking to somebody I knew in Allentown. The Call Chronicle had been a newspaper up there for decades and decades. The subscribers and the advertisers locally it supported the paper through their advertising, circulation, and from that money they'd build a brand new plant, a state-of-the-art presses. When the building and the company is sold several years later, the new owners separate the building from the paper and say now the Call Chronicle had to pay rent to this new entity that owns the building that the Call Chronicle had, in effect, built on its own. So, anyway, that's somewhat of a diversion, but it just shows you how so much money is being diverted in the wrong way and not helping people who need help.
Right. And now we were focusing on healthcare, but when it comes to jobs and a life that you can rely on and a life that a family can be built on, that same kind of rapacious bottom line, what they call efficiency, which is really much more closely austerity, is rampant throughout. Let me say, you've got about 5 more minutes for this conversation. If you were to say, as you sit, kind of looking at both the trends you've covered, we've talked a fair amount about the journalism within which you covered it, but the trends you covered, the state of the country, the fact that we have just had not just an electoral college victory, but a popular vote victory by someone as unfit for office as Donald Trump, who could run a campaign, I see, from my perspective, based on anger, grievance, and falsehoods. You've been at this so long in the trenches working. When you sort of look at where we've come from and how we're going to get out of here, let me put it this way. If I asked you to stand in the future 10 or 15 years from now, if we turn things around, how did we do it?
Well, I think the first thing we do is we do invest in the country. And one of the sad things about the Biden administration is that somehow they made a great investment.
Yes.
That somehow or another they could not figure out how to completely get that message across to people. But that's the kind of thing you have to do. I mean, the Trump tax bill invested in people making millions of dollars a year. And the Biden infrastructure bill invested in the country as a whole.
Yep.
Even in a lot of red states that voted against him. And
purposefully, a lot of it in red states.
So anyway, I mean, that's the trick. And we need to do more of that. And we need to figure out a way politically to communicate that properly so people realize what's happened. I mean, I think one of the things that hit so hard this time is that, American politics, every 4 years, every 2 years, is always a short-range proposition.
Yeah.
And the average voter can't think long-term. And I'm sympathetic to that in many ways because think of that New York Federal Reserve study of several years ago. That almost half the country, if somebody had needed $400 to get through an emergency, they don't have it. So most people, an awful lot of people, are just living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, short range. So if suddenly the cost of lettuce and cereal and soap detergent, whatever it is suddenly gone through
gas
the roof.
At the pump.
Gas at the pump. All of these things have hit them directly, and they're mad, and they react to that. What I'm worried about, and we'll see what happens. And I wouldn't be surprised 2 years from now if Trump has a lot of problems. We get a lot of the Democrats come back in both the House and the Senate. I mean, that, again, it's this short-range focus. But you really wish in terms of something like this investment in the country that we could get back to doing these things together. The Democrats and Republicans alike could agree that this kind of thing is a good thing to do. Invest in people overall. That, to me, is the salvation looking ahead. Not giving another big tax break like the Trump tax bill did. And I've often wondered, I don't even know to this day how many people realize. In that bill back in 2017, for the class of people making more than $1 million a year or more, overall, they got a $64,000 a year tax cut. If you were making $50,000 to $70,000, $80,000 or $80,000 a year, you got about $750, $800 a year. A lot of the percentages were the same, but the dollars were a lot different, of course. And I mean, are we going to get another one of those in these first 2 years, the extension of this and into the future?
I mean, it will take 2 or 3 or 4 Republican senators voting against it for us not to. So it's very likely that we will.
Exactly. And so I think looking ahead, that's the most important thing we do. We need to invest in the country as a whole.
Yeah.
And that's what things like this tax bill aren't doing. And we can see study after study that shows tax cuts do not help the society as a whole. There may be a temporary little blip here or there, but what really helps the society as a whole is overall investment. And that's always been the case. So looking ahead, that's what I would like to see. Don't ask me if I think I'm going to see it.
Yeah, and then the other piece, I think because we did see, as I said in the intro, as you've mentioned, we did see the Biden administration and the Democratic Party nationally move away from neoliberalism. We did see investment in the people, investment in the common good. And but they
radical idea. Yeah.
They completely failed the communication part. And I will say the number one reason, not the only reason, the number one reason was Biden was not up to it.
I think in retrospect, that's clear as a bell.
They kept him hidden when what we needed was a president out there letting people know. And I mean, there's the blame game is a stupid game, but the cost is so high that they didn't find a way to communicate the good they were doing.
I know. And I think the country will suffer as a result.
Oh, my God, yes.
Because when you look at the numbers, I mean, Trump didn't get that many more votes than he did 4 years ago.
That's right.
I mean, the basic fall-off was on the Democratic side.
Exactly. Yes. That's right. It was, and there was that gender thing where I what I was saying about the election prior to the election was I was hopeful that the passion and anger of women would outperform the passion and anger of men.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
that the anger over Dobbs and a sexual assault candidate would outweigh all the bro stuff about that the guys were upset about, and it turned out it didn't.
Yes, unfortunately you're right, and maybe someday that will be a different story. Maybe if she hadn't had to be linked with the inflation of the last few years, which clearly was the issue on a lot of people's minds who didn't go to the polls or who did.
That's right.
Then it might have been different.
Yeah,
but,
and I mean, we don't have to relitigate this, and you've probably done it several times since November anyway. But of course, had Biden dropped out earlier, had there been a convention, given the mood of the country, I don't think someone from the incumbent administration would have been the candidate. And so the Democrat could have run at least as a semi-outsider.
Right.
And it was an outsider election. The other thing I've been meaning to say a couple of times, as you've talked about, we'll probably see a change in 2 years, is that I think because of the temperature of the country and the way they're being communicated with these days, which heightens their temperature rather than lowers it, I think every election nowadays is a change election.
You may be right on that, exactly. And
throw the bums out is the easiest thing, and it's the easiest emotion to tap into.
It's America's voters' de facto term limits.
Yeah, right.
Really,
exactly. And I think that then we go back to the thing you were saying of, boy, we've got to look at the longer term. We've got to look at the longer term. Well, if every election is a change election based on whatever is triggering people's emotions and can be played on this time, long term, I mean, that goes back to the thing I said at the very top, which is we have not learned how to work together.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you and I are talking about putting meals on the table and paying your rent. We're not talking about climate change. We're not talking about pandemics. We're not talking about the real challenges, that the world has to, and America as a leading country has to confront. We're just talking about doing the right thing in a household, and it's difficult. We got to bring this to a close. Jim, obviously, thank you more than anything for all your years of work, but thank you for this time as well.
Well, thank you, Terrence. I always love talking to you, and I really appreciate your questions, and I think you hit on so many really great points that maybe we should all have hope for the future, because as long as there are people like you asking these questions and perhaps people listening to these, that gives me hope.
Yeah, thank you. And we should do this again, because you were obviously tracking the same things I am. Let me tell people that the website to learn more is barlettandsteele.com. I'm going to spell it for you. Barlett, Barlett, and Steele, Steele, Barlett and Steele, all one word.com. The most recent book in 2020 was America, What Went Wrong? The Crisis Deepens, an update, an expanded version of their 92 bestseller. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net, or a world that justmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and links to 10 or 15 articles to flesh out the conversation, sign up at my site or email me at McNally, TEMCNALLY, at mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the podcast at Apple Podcasts and most major podcast sites. You'll find in the archives Michael Lewis, Naomi Klein, Bill McKibben, Van Jones, Connie Rice, Greg Boyle. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely. And finally, thank you, Jim Steele. Keep up your good work.
Thank you so much, Terrence.